You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound.
In this video, we look at the other dimension of television we know as the Twilight Zone. This time around, I take you through some amazing facts and perhaps rather strange coincidences revolving around the actors, other series like Star Trek, and believe it or not, Hogan's Heroes, plus an amazing location that stands between Back to the Future and the episode Where Is Everybody? And spacesuits that went to the Three Stooges of all people. Finally, I look at some goofs that I missed on the last Twilight Zone Goofs video from the amazing last season of
The Twilight Zone.
Anybody here? Hey!
In the very first episode of The Twilight Zone, Where Is Everybody? Mike Ferris is in a small town and he doesn't know how he got there or where everybody is. When he leaves the mannequin factory building and looks around, the shot we see is of a very familiar town square. The set had been used for various movies, including To Kill a Mockingbird in 1962 and from Back to the Future movies as the City Hill Valley. There had been some major changes since the Twilight Zone episode, but you could see the courthouse clock tower, a theater, and some other buildings that still had very recognizable features. Coincidentally, Marty's trip through time could have very well been a Twilight Zone episode itself, as it featured one of the show's more common storylines, that of time travel.
The results of which could cause a chain reaction that would unravel the very fabric of the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe. Granted, that's a worst-case scenario. The destruction might in fact be very localized, limited to merely our own galaxy.
Now, Where Is Everybody came out in 1959, but Marty traveled back even farther to 1955.
In this corner of the universe, a prizefighter named Boley Jackson.
The episode Big Tall Wish focused on an aging boxer played by Ivan Dixon, who would go on to play Sergeant Kinch on the popular World War II POW series Hogan's Heroes that came out in 1965.
To all colonels, the war goes poorly. I shall seek out and find the most incompetent colonel in the entire German army. I have spoken.
Ivan's co-star on that Twilight Zone episode, The Big Tall Wish, was Kim Hamilton. In 1998, she went on to marry one of his co-stars from Hogan's Heroes, none other than Werner Klemperer, who played Colonel Klink. Unfortunately, he died just a couple years later.
The Fuhrer is looking for the most incompetent colonel in the German army to make him his new chief of staff.
Of course, Hogan's Heroes' enemy was Colonel Klink, who ran the prisoner of war camp.
Marvelous! Congratulations!
Hogan!
Did the Twilight Zone give birth to Star Trek somehow? Most of the main cast of the Star Trek actors appeared in at least one episode of the Twilight Zone. William Shatner, aka Captain Kirk, starred in 2 episodes, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet and Nick of Time. The Nightmare episode is one of the most popular episodes of Twilight Zone, where Shatner faces gremlins that are trying to take down a plane that he's on. Hey, William Shatner! Hey! Hey, it's me! Oh, man. I don't like heights.
There's a man out there. What? Look!
Of course, that's not exactly how the episode went. William Shatner? Oh, man! I'm in the Twilight Zone! Nice! Oh!
It isn't there.
Leonard Nimoy appeared on the episode A Quality of Mercy, without the Vulcan ears, of course. The encounter featured George Takei, aka Mr. Sulu. Valley of the Shadow featured James Doohan, aka Scott. There's a list a mile long of actors that have played in both Star Trek and the Twilight Zone. But not only that, but sound effects from the Twilight Zone were also used on Star Trek.
Fascinating.
Recognize these sounds from Execution, later used on Star Trek?
A fascinating cultural development.
Which brings us to this fascinating trivia fact.
Please, Spock, do me a favor. And don't say it's fascinating. No.
Russell Johnson, who is famous as the inventive professor on Gilligan's Island, played on 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone, and both of them turned out to be time travel episodes.
It is interesting.
In the episode Execution, Johnson brings a murderous cowboy from the 1800s to present-day 1960.
Only in the last few moments did he seem to have any grasp of what has occurred.
That's far right out of there.
In the second episode, Back There, he goes all the way back to 1865, the day Abraham Lincoln was shot.
The president's gonna be shot tonight!
Almost all of the stars of the later TV series Bewitched, which came out in 1964, appeared on episodes of The Twilight Zone, except for the actor that played Admiral Kravis and the actor that played Fake Darren, but we don't talk about him. One of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes of all time starred Elizabeth Montgomery and action star Charles Bronson on the episode 2.
The time, perhaps 100 years from now, or sooner. Or perhaps it's already happened.
In that episode, 2 survivors of an apocalyptic war are all that's left, and the question is, will they decide to get along, or will they kill each other? You can't do that. You're not married yet. To heighten the coincidence just a bit more, A Penny for Your Thoughts, starring Dick York, aired in the second season of The Twilight Zone as the 16th episode that season. And the episode starring Agnes Moorehead, entitled The Invaders, aired right before it as the 15th episode of the second season. Of course, if you ever watch Bewitched, you know she played as the hateful mother-in-law to Dick York's character Darren Stevens, who was married to Elizabeth Montgomery's character Samantha, the witch. Of course, all these Twilight Zone appearances by these stars happened before Bewitched actually became a series. In the 1959 movie Have Rocket Will Travel, the Stooges stole their spacesuit costumes from the Twilight Zone episode Elegy.
Back to the ship! Right on back! Oh!
Here's a goof from the episode A Kind of a Stopwatch. McNulty activates a watch that can stop time itself. At one point in the episode, we see a shot of what looks like an older film from the 1920s or 1930s, but it's supposed to be 1960s present day. In the episode Number 12 Looks Just Like You, a young woman's arm is cut off on the side by the split-screen process used to enable Susie Parker to appear on screen as two different characters. On the episode Stopover in a Quiet Town, a couple is completely alone in a town with no memory of how they got there. It's a very spooky episode, and even spookier when you notice that in this scene, way over to the left, someone is moving. It's really hard to see, but there is definitely somebody there. In that same episode, crew members are visible for just a split second, as they pan from the characters to Rod Serling's narrative. Means either that or ghosts.
Good thing I don't believe in ghosts.
Well, neither do I, but let's get out of here anyway.
We've got to get out of here. I'm scared.
I was watching this old episode of The Twilight Zone, and I was amazed at how many connections I found to Superman and Batman in this one episode entitled Caesar and Me.
Jonathan West, ventriloquist, a master of voice manipulation.
It's not really the best Twilight Zone episode I've ever seen, but the amount of coincidences I found in connection to DC Comics' most famous superheroes is just downright freaky. It's almost as if the Twilight Zone mingled with the world of DC Comics for one episode.
Holy roller coasters!
The episode in question was Caesar and Me. It originally aired on April 10th, 1964. In the very first scene, it got my attention right away. The main star of this particular episode was Jackie Cooper, who is in the first scene is playing a poor ventriloquist that has to pawn off his grandfather's watch.
I'm afraid that's all I can give you.
Right away, I noticed it's Jackie Cooper, the actor that played Perry White in the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and he's pawning his watch off to Stafford Rep, the actor that played Chief O'Hara on the 60s Batman series.
You know what this means, don't you?
If you're thinking what I'm afraid you're thinking...
It's like Great Shades of Elvis. Wait a minute, the title of this episode is Caesar and Me, and Perry White's most famous catchphrase was, of course, Great Caesar's Ghost. But this was more than a decade before Cooper would play Perry White.
Not only does he have a snappy, punchy prose style, but he is, in my 40 years in this business, the fastest typist I've ever seen.
Interesting coincidence, you say. Not much to see here, you might say. But it doesn't stop there. It's just begun.
I'm sorry, Mr. West.
Wait, what's that? Cooper's last name is West?
Holy coincidence, Lord!
Adam West would play Batman less than 2 years later. And what's this? Cooper's first name is Jonathan? Everybody knows Jonathan's the first name of Superman's adopted father.
Uncanny photographic mental processes.
Cooper's character is a down-and-out ventriloquist whose dummy actually talks and convinces him to turn to a life of crime to pay his bills.
Listen to me. This is the big one.
But this is the last one. The end for me.
Yeah, sure.
Coincidentally, one of Batman's rogues gallery is a villain named the Ventriloquist. There are actually 3 versions of this character. The first one appeared in 1988, years after this episode was made. Now, if you think this dummy looks familiar, that's because he's the same dummy they used for the 1962 Twilight Zone episode, The Dummy, which starred another ventriloquist with a live dummy played by, get this, Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, Cliff Robertson, who also played on 5 episodes of the 60s Batman as a villain named Shane.
Don't make a move, Batman, or I'll fill you full of lead.
You can't frighten us with a vague threat, Shane.
Whether or not this is supposed to be the same dummy from the previous episode in the story, I don't think was ever said, but it would make sense if it was. But in the 1962 episode, the dummy is named Willie, while the latter one is named Caesar. But of course, maybe he changed his name because he was in hiding. He is an evil, crooked dummy.
You big dummy!
The dummy was modeled after actor George Murdoch, who played in several episodes of The X-Files, and coincidentally, an episode of Smallville, and an episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. After failing at an audition with his dummy, Jonathan West heads to the unemployment office, where he meets Batman. Well, the voice of the Super Friends Batman, Olin Soul.
So that's what they've been up to. An entire army of villains to do their evil bidding.
He did the voice of Batman as a super friend for years until Adam West joined the show and they moved Olin over to doing the voice of Professor Stein. Interestingly enough, Soul only weighed 135 pounds. You know, in the comics, Batman is supposed to weigh about 210 pounds. According to one source I read, Adam West was actually pretty close to Batman's height and weight, coming in at 6'2" and at 196 pounds.
The electrical shock demagnetized the slide.
Soul's first gig as Batman started on the Filmation series The Batman Superman Hour way back in 1968, a few years before the Super Friends, as well as the voice of Alfred on that series, and he did the voice of Batman for a couple of Scooby-Doo team-up movies. Oh, and believe it or not, he appeared on the 60s Adam West Batman series once as a newscaster. Think of it, 2 Batmans in one episode, and it wouldn't be the last time. For Soul and West would both be on the Super Friends legendary Super Power show together years later. Bizarre, strange, believe it or not. All these coincidences and connections to Superman and Batman in what we might call Easter eggs today were done seemingly without purpose or intent, years before they were even relevant in the Twilight Zone. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, hit the bell for future notifications, and have a great day.